They said Nathaniel Cross had hands that could build anything and a heart that had forgotten how to feel. He was a frontier carpenter who'd lost his wife to a birthing that went wrong, and rumor had it he blamed every midwife in the territory for not being skilled enough to save her. Every woman who tried to reach him had failed. He wanted nothing to do with healing or birth or the women who presided over those mysteries. They thought a man that bitter couldn't be softened. They were wrong. They didn't know that sometimes the person who needs healing most is the one standing beside the healer. This is the true story of how the most skilled midwife in Wyoming couldn't walk but could run circles around doctors with twice her legs and 10 times her pride, and how a broken man learned that strength has nothing to do with what your body can do, and everything to do with what your spirit refuses to quit. Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory. May 1885. The wagon rattled to a stop in front of what used to be the Mercantile, and Abigail Fletcher felt the familiar weight of judgment settle over the street like dust after rain. She could see it in how people paused mid-step. In how conversations died. In how eyes tracked the wagon with that particular mix of pity and discomfort that able-bodied people always had when confronted with disability. "Here we are, Miss Abby," Samuel, the freight driver, said with forced cheerfulness. Redemption Creek. Fresh start, just like you wanted. Fresh start. Abigail almost laughed at the optimism. There were no fresh starts for women in wheelchairs. Just the same old story told in different towns with different faces making the same assumptions. She was 32 years old, and she'd been in a wheelchair since she was 16. A riding accident, her horse had spooked, thrown her, and she'd landed wrong on rocks. The doctors said her spine was damaged. Said she'd never walk again. Said she should be grateful to be alive and content herself with whatever limited life she could manage. Abigail had other ideas about what constituted a life worth living. "Help me down," she asked Samuel, who nodded and came around to lift her from the wagon seat into her wheelchair, a clever contraption she'd designed herself with wheels large enough to handle rough terrain and handles positioned for maximum leverage. She could move herself, thank you very much. Didn't need to be carried everywhere like furniture. Samuel set the wheelchair on the ground, then lifted Abigail into it with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd made this trip before. She settled herself, adjusted her skirts, practical calico in dark blue, because pale colors showed every speck of dirt, and she worked too hard to worry about staying pristine, and took stock of her new home. Redemption Creek wasn't much. Maybe 300 people if you counted the outlying farms. One main street lined with the usual frontier establishments, general store, hotel, saloon, church, blacksmith. And one building with a faded sign that read, Dr. Howard Pike, Physician. Good. She'd need to introduce herself to the local doctor. Professional courtesy, and all that. "Where's the place I'm renting?" Abigail asked. "Small house at the end of the street," Samuel said, pointing. "Used to belong to the last midwife, before she..." "Before she what?" Samuel looked uncomfortable. "Before she couldn't handle it anymore. Towns had bad luck with births lately. Lost 3 mothers in the last year. Doc Pike does his best, but he's getting old, and his hands shake. Town needs a skilled midwife, Miss Abby. They just don't know it yet." Abigail understood what he wasn't saying. They'd hired her out of desperation, not choice. Beggars couldn't be choosers, and a town that couldn't keep mothers alive would even accept a crippled midwife. She wheeled herself down the street toward her new house, ignoring the stares. Let them look. Let them whisper. She'd heard it all before. Can't possibly be effective in a wheelchair. How's she supposed to help with birthing when she can't even stand? What was the town council thinking, hiring her? Abigail's jaw tightened, but her face remained pleasantly neutral. She'd learned early that showing anger only confirmed their prejudices. Better to smile, nod, and then prove them wrong through sheer competence. The house was small but clean, with a ramp leading to the door, thank God for small mercies, and rooms sized reasonably for a woman who couldn't climb stairs. One room would be her living space, one her examination room, one for storage of her supplies. She'd barely begun unpacking when someone knocked on her door. Abigail wheeled over and opened it to find a young woman, maybe 25, visibly pregnant, 7 months if Abigail's practiced I was correct, with tears streaming down her face. "Please," the woman said. "I'm Mary Bennett. My sister Rachel, she's in labor. It's been 12 hours and the baby won't come and Doc Pike says he can't help and," she looked at Abigail's wheelchair, and her face crumpled. "Oh God, they said you were the new midwife but you can't even." "Can't even what?" Abigail's voice was calm, professional. "Can't even help your sister. Try me." "Where is she?" "The hotel. Room 3. But nothing. Get my bag, the black one by the door, and meet me there. Go." Mary hesitated only a moment, then grabbed the bag and ran. Abigail wheeled herself out of the house and down the street toward the hotel, moving with practiced efficiency. Her arms were strong from years of pushing herself, and she moved faster than most people walked. She burst through the hotel door and found the stairs. "Damn! Someone," she called out. "I need 2 strong men. Now." The hotel keeper appeared, along with a ranch hand who'd been drinking in the saloon next door. "I need you to carry me upstairs," Abigail said without preamble. "The chair stays here. Just me. Room 3. Quick." They stared at her. "A woman is dying upstairs," Abigail said, her voice like iron. "You can stand there gawking at the crippled woman, or you can help me save her life. Choose. Now." The ranch hand moved first, scooping her up as easily as a child. He took the stairs 2 at a time while the hotel keeper followed with her medical bag. Room 3 was chaos. Rachel was on the bed, unconscious, skin gray, barely breathing. Doc Pike, an old man with a white beard and trembling hands, looked up with naked relief when Abigail was deposited beside the bed. "Thank God," he said. "I can't do this anymore. My hands." "I see it," Abigail said. She examined Rachel quickly, efficiently, her hands moving with practiced certainty even though she was sitting on the bed's edge rather than standing over it. "Baby's breech. Foot first. That's why she's stuck." "I tried to turn it," Doc Pike said, his voice shaking. "But my hands aren't steady enough for this kind of work anymore," Abigail finished gently. "It's all right, doctor. Step back. Let me work." What followed was 2 hours of the most intense medical work Abigail had ever done. She couldn't stand, couldn't get the leverage that most midwives used. So she improvised. Used her upper body strength to apply pressure. Talked Rachel back to consciousness and coached her through pushing even when she wanted to quit. Maneuvered the baby with careful, precise movements that required more finesse than force. And when that baby girl finally slipped into Abigail's waiting hands, alive, crying, perfect, the room erupted in relieved sobs. "You did it," Doc Pike said, his old eyes wet. "I couldn't have done that. Not anymore. But you did it." "We did it," Abigail corrected, wrapping the baby and placing her on Rachel's chest. "All of us. Together." But as she sat there, covered in blood and sweat, unable to stand or walk away from the bed under her own power, Abigail felt the familiar frustration rise. She'd saved a life. Done the impossible. And still needed to be carried out of the room like baggage. That was when she met Nathaniel Cross. He was standing in the hotel hallway when the ranch hand carried Abigail out, and the look on his face was something between shock and something else. Something Abigail couldn't quite read. "You're the new midwife," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am. Abigail Fletcher." She would have extended her hand if she wasn't being carried like a sack of flour. "And you are?" "Nathaniel Cross. I build things." He paused. "I heard what you did. Heard you saved Rachel Bennett when Doc Pike couldn't. Doc Pike's hands aren't what they used to be. But yes, I helped. That's what midwives do." Nathaniel's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. "Finally, my wife died in childbirth. 8 years ago. The midwife couldn't save her. Couldn't save my son." Abigail felt something clench in her chest. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Everyone's sorry," Nathaniel said, echoing words Abigail had heard before. "But sorry doesn't bring them back. And every time I see a pregnant woman, every time I hear about a birth, I remember what was taken from me." "So why are you here?" Abigail asked. "Why come to a hotel where a woman just gave birth?" Nathaniel looked at her directly for the first time, and his eyes, dark brown, intense, haunted, held hers. "Because I heard you did what you're not supposed to be able to do. Saved a life from a wheelchair. And I wanted to see if the impossible was possible. If someone could overcome what they're told they can't." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Abigail confused and intrigued in equal measure. Over the next 3 weeks, Abigail established herself in Redemption Creek. She delivered 4 more babies, all successfully. She treated 2 cases of childbed fever with the herbal preparations she'd learned from an old Cherokee healer. She examined a dozen pregnant women and gave them advice on nutrition, exercise, positioning. And she did it all from a wheelchair, proving daily that legs weren't required for capable hands and a sharp mind. But the prejudice remained. The women came to her out of necessity. Doc Pike had essentially retired, referring all maternity cases to her, but they came with doubt written on their faces. How could a crippled woman possibly help them? How could someone who couldn't walk guide them through childbirth? The worst was Victoria Ashford. Yes, they were everywhere, weren't they? A wealthy rancher's wife who was pregnant with her first child and made no secret of her disdain. "I don't see how you can possibly help me," Victoria said at their first appointment, looking around Abigail's examination room with obvious distaste. "A proper midwife would be able to stand, to move, to assist properly. You're limited." Abigail smiled pleasantly, though her hands clenched in her lap. "Mrs. Ashford, I've delivered 43 babies in my career. All 43 mothers lived. All 43 babies lived. My legs don't work, but my hands do. My brain does. My experience does. That's what matters." "Experience from a wheelchair," Victoria sniffed. "I'll see you because there's no other choice, but understand, if anything goes wrong, my husband will make sure everyone knows you were inadequate for the task." After Victoria left, Abigail sat in her examination room and let herself feel the anger she never showed patience. Let herself acknowledge the unfairness of a world that judged her by what her body couldn't do rather than what her mind and hands accomplished daily. She was still sitting there when Nathaniel Cross knocked on her door. "I'm closed for the day," she called out. "I'm not here as a patient," his voice came through the door. "I'm here with a proposal." Curious despite herself, Abigail wheeled to the door and opened it. Nathaniel stood there holding what looked like wooden plans. "I build things," he said without preamble. "That's what I do. Houses, furniture, whatever's needed. And I've been watching you navigate this town, watching how the steps exclude you, how buildings aren't built for chairs like yours. So I'm going to build you a better wheelchair. One that can handle stairs." Abigail stared at him. "That's impossible." You do the impossible every day, Nathaniel said. Delivering babies from a wheelchair. Saving lives when you're told you can't. Maybe I can do something impossible too. Why? Abigail asked. Why would you do this for me? Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Because you remind me that broken things can still work. That loss doesn't have to be the end of everything. And because I want to help someone for once instead of just being angry at everyone. Over the next month, Nathaniel became a fixture in Abigail's life in a way that felt both surprising and inevitable. It started practically. He'd show up at her door with designs for the wheelchair, asking questions about her daily challenges. What doors were too narrow? Which buildings had steps that excluded her? What tasks did she struggle with most? Abigail found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone since the accident. Talking about the small daily humiliations of living in a world built for walking people. The way people spoke over her head, as if the wheelchair made her invisible. The way shopkeepers would ask her companion what she wanted rather than asking her directly. The way strangers felt entitled to ask invasive questions about her injury, her abilities, her personal life. It's exhausting, she admitted one evening as they sat in her examination room, him sketching designs while she prepared herbal medicines. Not the physical limitations, I've adapted to those. But the constant need to prove myself. To show that I'm competent despite the chair. That I'm worthy of respect despite my disability. Nathaniel looked up from his sketches. You shouldn't have to prove anything. Your work speaks for itself. But it doesn't, Abigail said. Not to most people. They see the chair first. See what I can't do. And then I have to work twice as hard to make them see what I can do. Then they're fools, Nathaniel said simply. And you're wasting energy caring what fools think. Abigail laughed despite herself. That's easy to say when you're not the one in the chair. Maybe, Nathaniel admitted. But Abby, I've been watching you work for 3 weeks now. Watching how you handle patients with such skill and compassion. Watching how you navigate this town despite every obstacle they throw at you. And you know what I see? What? Strength. Real strength. Not the kind that comes from legs or arms or physical ability. The kind that comes from refusing to quit when the world tells you to. From choosing to help people who doubt you. From building a life on your own terms instead of accepting the limited life others think you should have. He paused. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Abigail Fletcher. And it has nothing to do with whether you can walk. Something in Abigail's chest cracked open at those words. She'd spent 16 years being told she was brave, inspiring, courageous, all words that felt like consolation prizes for not being whole. But Nathaniel wasn't patronizing her. He was seeing her. Really seeing her. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. The wheelchair, I mean. Why spend so much time on it? Nathaniel set down his pencil and looked at her directly. Can I tell you something? Something I haven't told anyone. Of course. When Sarah died, my wife, I blamed everyone. The midwife for not being skilled enough. The doctor for not getting there in time. God for taking them. But mostly I blamed myself for not being able to fix it. For being useless while she screamed in pain. For just standing there while everything fell apart. His voice was raw with old pain, and Abigail found herself wheeling closer, reaching out to touch his hand. For 8 years I've been angry, Nathaniel continued. Angry at the world. Angry at healing. Angry at birth and life and anything that reminded me of what I lost. And then I heard about you. About how you'd saved Rachel Bennett when Doc Pike couldn't. About how you'd done the impossible from a wheelchair. And I realized. Realized what? That I'd been focusing on the wrong thing. That losing Sarah wasn't about anyone not being skilled enough or fast enough. It was just tragedy. The kind that happens sometimes despite everyone's best efforts. And that being angry at midwives wasn't honoring Sarah's memory. It was just poisoning my own life. He looked up at her with eyes that were wet but clear. So I started watching you work. Started seeing how you saved lives despite every obstacle. Started seeing that maybe healing wasn't my enemy. That maybe the people who do this work, who deliver babies and save mothers and refuse to give up, maybe they're heroes. Not villains. Nathaniel, Abigail said softly. I'm not a hero. I'm just doing my job. No, he said firmly. You're doing it despite this entire town treating you like you're less capable because of a chair. You're doing it despite people like Victoria Ashford saying cruel things. You're doing it despite every door and step and building being designed to exclude you. That's not just doing a job. That's heroism. Abigail felt tears start. I don't feel heroic. I feel tired. I feel frustrated. I feel like I'm constantly fighting just to be treated like a normal person. Then let me help you fight, Nathaniel said. Let me build you tools that make the fighting easier. Let me make this town more accessible. Let me be someone who sees you for who you are, not what your legs can't do. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened in quiet ways. Nathaniel would bring her dinner when he knew she'd been working all day and forgotten to eat. Abigail would help him understand the medical aspects of carpentry, how to build beds for birthing, how to design examination tables that worked for wheelchair-bound doctors. They'd talk late into the evening about everything and nothing. About Sarah and the baby Nathaniel had lost. About Abigail's accident and the years of learning to live with paralysis. About loss and grief and the ways people rebuild their lives from ruins. And slowly, carefully, they both began to heal. Nathaniel stopped flinching when he heard about births. Started asking Abigail about her work with genuine interest rather than painful memory. Began to see that healing wasn't his enemy, that the people who did this work were trying their best in an imperfect world. Abigail stopped bracing herself for rejection. Started believing that someone could see past the chair to the woman inside. Began to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could have what she thought was impossible: partnership. Love. A life beyond just work and proving herself. The wheelchair was finished on a Tuesday evening in late May. Nathaniel wheeled it into her examination room with a smile that was both proud and nervous. It's done, he said. Or as done as it's going to get for now. I can keep improving it, but I want you to try this version first. It was beautiful. The frame was reinforced oak, lighter than her old chair but stronger. The wheels were larger, with clever treads he'd carved into the wood that would grip on mud and uneven ground. But the genius was in the mechanism, a pulley system with handles that could be manipulated to pull the chair up steps, using counterweights and leverage to overcome gravity. It's called a climbing wheelchair, Nathaniel explained, demonstrating how the pulley worked. The design isn't mine. I found drawings in an engineering journal from back east, from a man named Everett. But I adapted it for frontier conditions. Wider wheels for mud. Reinforced joints for rough terrain. And I added this. He demonstrated a brake system that locked the wheels for stability on inclines. Then a folding mechanism that made the chair easier to transport. Then storage compartments built into the frame for her medical supplies. You thought of everything, Abigail said, running her hands over the wood, feeling the quality of the craftsmanship, the care in every joint and curve. Nathaniel, this must have taken hundreds of hours. 3 weeks of every evening and weekend, he admitted. Plus materials I had to order from Denver. But it's worth it if it helps. If it makes your life even a little bit easier. Abigail transferred herself from her old chair to the new one, feeling the difference immediately. It was smoother, more responsive, better balanced. The climbing mechanism worked. She tested it on the 3 steps leading to her porch, and the pulley system lifted her up with relative ease. "It's incredible," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been in a wheelchair for 16 years, and this is the first time anyone's tried to make the world accessible to me instead of expecting me to just manage." "You shouldn't have to just manage," Nathaniel said quietly. "You should have access. Dignity. Independence. That's what this is for." Abigail wheeled back to where he stood and looked up at him, this man who'd spent weeks building her freedom. "Why?" she asked again, but this time the question was different. "Why spend so much time on this? On me? Really?" Nathaniel knelt beside her chair, her new chair, so they were eye level. His brown eyes were intense, serious, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "Because somewhere in the last month, I stopped being angry at the world. Stopped blaming midwives for what happened to Sarah. Stopped punishing myself for not being able to save her. And I started seeing you. Actually seeing you. Not the chair. Not the disability. You. Abigail." He reached out and took her hand, his work-roughened fingers gentle against hers. "I see a woman who saves lives every day despite incredible obstacles. Who fights prejudice with grace and competence. Who refuses to be limited by what her body can't do. Who's taught me that strength has nothing to do with legs and everything to do with spirit. And I'm..." He took a breath. "I'm falling in love with you. With all of you. Exactly as you are." Abigail felt tears streaming down her face. "Nathaniel, I can't, I'm not. People will say you're settling, that you could have anyone." "I don't want anyone," Nathaniel interrupted, his voice fierce. "I want you. Your mind that sees solutions where others see problems. Your hands that catch babies and save mothers. Your heart that keeps giving compassion even when people doubt you. Your refusal to quit even when this entire town treats you like you're less than. That's what I love. That's who you are. And I don't care what anyone says about it. People will talk," Abigail whispered. "They'll say terrible things. About you lowering yourself. About me trapping you. About how you could do so much better than a cripple. Then let them talk," Nathaniel said. "I've spent 8 years living in anger and grief. I'm done with that. I'm done letting other people's opinions dictate my life. I want to build something new. With you. If you'll have me." Abigail looked at this man, this good, broken, healing man who saw past her wheelchair to the woman inside. Who'd spent weeks building her access to a world that excluded her. Who loved her not despite her disability but including it, as part of who she was. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Nathaniel. I want that too." When he kissed her, Abigail felt something she'd stopped letting herself feel years ago, hope that someone could love all of her. That she could have partnership, not just pity. That she could be chosen, not settled for. That she was enough. Exactly as she was. But their happiness was short-lived. The epidemic started in June with a whisper that became a scream. It began with little Emma Hartley, a farmhand's 5-year-old daughter. Her mother brought her to Abigail complaining of fever and a sore throat. Abigail examined the child, saw the grayish membrane beginning to form in her throat, and felt ice settle in her stomach. "This is diphtheria," she told Mrs. Hartley quietly. "Keep her isolated. I'll prepare treatment, but..." She didn't finish. They both knew diphtheria killed children. Killed them fast. Emma Hartley was dead 3 days later. Then came the Brewster twins, both sick. Then the Johnson boy. Then 4 more children from the schoolhouse. Within a week, the town was in panic. Families were keeping their children inside, refusing to let anyone visit. The church held prayer services. Doc Pike, his hands shaking worse than ever, tried to help but could do little more than comfort the dying. And then the disease found the pregnant women. Sarah Mills, 6 months along with her 3rd child, was the first. Abigail examined her in her small house on the edge of town, feeling the fever burning through Sarah's skin, seeing the telltale membrane forming in her throat. "Can you save the baby?" Sarah whispered, her hand on her swollen belly. "If it comes down to choosing." "It's not coming down to choosing," Abigail said firmly, though her heart was pounding. "I'm going to save both of you." "But Sarah, I need you to fight." "Can you do that?" Sarah nodded weakly. Abigail moved into the Mills house for 3 days, treating Sarah with cool compresses, herbal teas made from willow bark and elderberry, steam inhalations to help her breathe. She monitored the baby's heartbeat constantly, adjusting Sarah's position to ensure blood flow to the womb. She barely slept, dozing in her wheelchair beside Sarah's bed, waking at every change in breathing. And Sarah lived. The fever broke on the 3rd day, and the membrane in her throat began to dissolve. The baby's heartbeat remained strong. "You did it," Sarah sobbed when Abigail told her they were both going to be all right. "Everyone said diphtheria in pregnancy was a death sentence, but you did it." But Abigail couldn't celebrate. Because 2 more pregnant women had fallen sick. Martha Patterson, 7 months pregnant with twins. And Rose Chen, the Chinese laundress's daughter, 5 months pregnant and already so weak from poverty that the disease hit her twice as hard. Abigail split her time between 3 houses, wheeling herself through the streets of Redemption Creek at all hours, her medical bag strapped to her chair, her face grim with determination. Nathaniel tried to help, carrying her upstairs when needed, but mostly he just watched with growing fear as the woman he loved drove herself to exhaustion trying to save everyone. "You need to rest," he told her one night when he found her asleep in her wheelchair outside Martha Patterson's house. "Abby, you're going to collapse." "I'll rest when they're better," Abigail said. "Martha's twins are in distress. If I leave, they might die." "I can't," her voice broke. "I can't lose them, Nathaniel. I can't." Martha Patterson's labor started on the 5th day of her illness. The fever was still high, her body was weak, and the twins were fighting to survive in a womb being starved of oxygen. Abigail had to make a choice: wait for the fever to break and risk the babies dying, or deliver them early and risk both mother and premature infants dying from the stress. She chose to deliver. The labor was 18 hours of hell. Martha was too weak to push effectively. The first twin was breech. The second was tangled in the cord. Abigail worked with hands that shook from exhaustion but never faltered, using every trick she'd learned, every technique she developed, refusing to let death win. When those 2 tiny babies finally entered the world, small, blue, gasping for air, Abigail worked to resuscitate them with a desperation that bordered on frenzy. Cleared their airways. Rubbed their tiny chests. Breathed air into their miniature lungs. And both babies cried. Weak, thin cries, but cries nonetheless. Alive. Martha Patterson sobbed with relief, too weak to even hold her daughters, but alive herself, fever finally beginning to break. 3 pregnant women saved. 3 babies saved. But the epidemic wasn't done yet. 2 more pregnant women fell sick. Then 3 more. The disease was spreading through Redemption Creek's maternal population like wildfire, and Abigail found herself facing an impossible task, saving an entire town's future one mother at a time. Doc Pike came to her after the first week, his old face drawn. "Abby, you can't do this alone. You need help." "There is no help," Abigail said flatly. She was in her examination room, preparing more herbal medicines, and she was so tired she could barely see straight. "You can't treat them anymore, document. Your hands won't allow it. And I'm the only other medical professional for 50 miles. Then train someone," Doc Pike said. "Train the women who've recovered. Teach them basic care. You can't be everywhere at once." It was brilliant. Abigail began training the healthy women, those who'd already had the disease and recovered, who were now immune. She taught them to take temperatures, to prepare cooling baths, to recognize signs of respiratory distress. She taught them the herbal remedies that helped and the ones that didn't. She created a system where she could oversee multiple patients without having to be physically present at all times. And it worked. Slowly, gradually, the death rate began to drop. But then Victoria Ashford fell sick. And suddenly, everything Abigail had achieved was on the line. Her husband came to Abigail's door at midnight, pounding hard enough to shake the frame. "You have to come. Victoria's burning up with fever. She's delirious. The baby," his voice broke. "Please. I know she was cruel to you. I know she said terrible things. But please don't let her die. Don't let our baby die." Abigail looked at this man, wealthy, powerful, used to getting his way, reduced to begging at a crippled woman's door because his wife was dying. "Get me to her," Abigail said, already moving, grabbing her medical bag. Now. The Ashford house was the largest in Redemption Creek, a testament to wealth and status. It had multiple bedrooms, expensive furniture, carpets from back east, and a grand staircase that mocked Abigail's wheelchair with every curved step. She'd been carried up those stairs before, during Victoria's pregnancy checkups, and each time had felt like a small humiliation. But tonight, with Victoria dying upstairs, there was no time for pride. "Carry me," she told Mr. Ashford. "Quick." He lifted her without hesitation, taking the stairs 3 at a time, his face pale with fear. The bedroom was chaos. Victoria was in the massive 4-poster bed, her skin flushed an alarming red, her breath coming in harsh gasps that sounded like she was drowning. The housekeeper stood in the corner, wringing her hands helplessly. The fever was so high Abigail could feel it radiating from Victoria's body. "How long has she been like this?" Abigail asked, pressing her hand to Victoria's forehead. "Too hot. Dangerously, critically too hot. Since this morning," Mr. Ashford said, his voice shaking. "I sent for Doc Pike, but he said there's nothing he can do. That it's in God's hands now. That we should prepare for the worst." "God's hands work through human hands," Abigail said grimly, already examining Victoria's throat. The membrane was thick, blocking airflow. The baby's position was wrong, stress from the illness had caused early labor to begin. Victoria was 8 months pregnant, and both mother and baby were in mortal danger. "I need you to do exactly what I say," Abigail told Mr. Ashford. "Bring me cool water. Lots of it. Clean cloths. Ice if you have any. And then get everyone out except me. She needs quiet." What followed was 3 days and nights that would haunt Abigail for the rest of her life. She stayed in the Ashford house, in her wheelchair beside Victoria's bed, barely sleeping. She treated Victoria with every technique she knew: cool compresses to bring down the fever, herbal teas to fight the infection, steam inhalations with eucalyptus and mint to help her breathe despite the membrane growing in her throat. She had to do a procedure she'd only read about, never performed, using a long, thin hollow reed to create an airway past the membrane when Victoria couldn't breathe at all. The reed down Victoria's throat, held in place while Abigail prayed it would work, while Mr. Ashford sobbed in the hallway, while the housekeeper said Hail Marys. And miraculously, it worked. Victoria gasped air through the reed, and her lips went from blue back to pink. But the fever wouldn't break. For 2 days Victoria hovered between life and death, sometimes delirious, sometimes lucid. During the lucid moments, she would look at Abigail with tears streaming. "I was so cruel to you," Victoria whispered once, her voice damaged from the throat tube. "I said terrible things. About your chair. About your limitations. I was wrong. I'm so sorry." "Save your strength," Abigail said gently, adjusting the cool cloth on Victoria's forehead. "We can talk about forgiveness when you're well. If I die." "You're not going to die," Abigail said firmly. "I won't allow it." On the 3rd day, Victoria went into labor. The contractions started mid-afternoon, when Victoria was still fever-delirious, her body too weak to handle labor, her baby too small to be born safely. Abigail felt panic rise. She'd saved mothers, she'd saved premature babies, but both at once, with the mother this sick. But she had no choice. The labor wouldn't stop. The baby was coming whether they were ready or not. "Victoria," Abigail said, gripping her hand, trying to pull her back to consciousness. "Victoria, listen to me. You need to wake up. Your baby is coming. I need you to fight. Can you hear me?" Victoria's fever-bright eyes flickered open. "I can't," she gasped between contractions, her face gray with exhaustion and illness. "I'm too weak. The baby's too early. We're both going to die and it's my fault for being too proud, too cruel." "Victoria Ashford, you listen to me right now," Abigail said, her voice like iron. She leaned in close, her face inches from Victoria's. "I know I'm not what you wanted. I know you think I'm inadequate because I can't walk. I know you looked at this chair and assumed I was less capable, less competent, less worthy. But right now, your baby needs to be born, and I am the best chance both of you have. So you're going to stop apologizing and start fighting. You're going to trust me, trust the crippled woman you mocked, because I'm all you've got. Do you understand?" Something in Abigail's voice cut through Victoria's delirium. Her eyes focused, cleared slightly. "You promise? You'll save my baby?" "I promise I'll do everything in my power," Abigail said. "But I need you to help me. Push when I tell you. Breathe when I tell you. Trust me. Can you do that?" Victoria nodded weakly. "I trust you." The labor was brutal. Victoria was too weak from 3 days of fever. The baby was too early, 8 months, small, possibly with underdeveloped lungs. The fever was still cooking Victoria from the inside. And Abigail had to manage all of this from a wheelchair, unable to stand for leverage, unable to move around the bed easily. But she'd spent 16 years learning to work from a seated position. Learning to use her upper body strength, her positioning, her careful hands instead of her absent legs. And now she used every trick, every technique, every bit of skill she'd accumulated. "Push," she coached Victoria through a contraction. "Good. Now breathe. That's it. Save your strength for the next one." Hours passed. Victoria screamed, cried, begged for it to be over. Mr. Ashford paced in the hallway, his footsteps like thunder. The housekeeper prayed her rosary so hard the beads clacked. And Abigail worked. Steady, calm, refusing to panic even when Victoria's pulse became thready, even when the baby's heartbeat started to weaken, even when it seemed impossible that either of them would survive. "One more push," Abigail said as the baby's head crowned. "Victoria, one more push. That's all. Just one more." "I can't." "Yes you can. For your baby. For your husband. For yourself. One more push. Now." Victoria gathered every last reserve of strength and pushed. And the baby slipped into Abigail's waiting hands. A boy. Small, far too small, his skin bluish and waxy, not breathing. For one terrible moment, everything stopped. The baby didn't cry. Didn't gasp. Didn't move. Abigail's world narrowed to this tiny life in her hands. She cleared his airway with practiced efficiency. Rubbed his tiny chest vigorously. Bent down and breathed gentle air into his miniature lungs. Nothing. She tried again. Rubbed harder. Breathed again. Come on, baby. Come on. Breathe. And then, a gasp. A cough. A thin, angry wail that was the most beautiful sound Abigail had ever heard. The baby boy was alive. Small but alive. 8 months but strong enough. Crying with fury at being born into this cold, bright world. Abigail wrapped him quickly in warm blankets, checked him thoroughly, 10 fingers, 10 toes, lungs working, heart beating strong, and then placed him on Victoria's chest. Victoria, barely conscious, looked down at her son and burst into tears. "We did it," she sobbed. "You saved us. Both of us. You saved us." "You did it," Abigail corrected, her own face wet with tears of relief and exhaustion. "You fought. You trusted me. You chose to believe that these hands," she held up her work-worn, capable hands, "could do what needed to be done, chair or no chair." Mr. Ashford burst into the room, saw his wife alive and his son crying, and fell to his knees beside the bed. "Thank God. Thank God. Abby, we can never repay you for this." "You don't need to repay me," Abigail said. "Just treat the next person you meet with a disability like they're capable until they prove otherwise. That's payment enough." Victoria reached out from the bed and grabbed Abigail's hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For everything I said. Every assumption I made. You're not inadequate. You're not limited. You're the most capable person I've ever met. And I was a fool not to see it." Abigail squeezed her hand gently. "You see it now. That's what matters." By the time the epidemic ended 3 weeks later, Abigail had delivered 6 babies from severely ill mothers, treated 24 pregnant women for infection, and hadn't lost a single maternal patient. The town noticed. Suddenly, the whispers changed. The stares became admiring instead of pitying. Women who'd been skeptical came to her with gratitude and respect. "You saved my daughter," one woman said. "Doc Pike had given up, but you didn't. You knew what to do when no one else did," another said. "Chair or no chair, you're the best medical care this town's ever had." Even the town council, which had hired her out of desperation, formally recognized her service. But it was Nathaniel's reaction that mattered most to Abigail. He came to her house the day after the last patient was released from quarantine, and found her asleep in her wheelchair, too exhausted to transfer herself to bed. He lifted her carefully, she woke with a start, and carried her to her bed. "You're going to hurt yourself," Abigail murmured sleepily. "You just saved the whole town," Nathaniel said. "I think I can handle carrying you to bed." He sat beside her, and Abigail saw tears in his eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right." Nathaniel took her hand. "Abigail, I watched you work these last 3 weeks. Watched you refuse to give up on people who'd given up on themselves. Watched you prove every single day that your worth has nothing to do with your legs and everything to do with your heart and your hands and your refusal to quit. And I realized something." "What?" "That I don't want to spend another day without you." Nathaniel pulled a simple silver ring from his pocket. "I know this is fast. I know people will say things. But Abigail Fletcher, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life building things that make your life easier, while you spend your life saving others? Abigail looked at the ring, then at this man who saw past her wheelchair to the woman inside, who'd spent weeks building her something no one else had thought to give her, access to a world that excluded her. Yes, she said. Yes, Nathaniel. I'll marry you. They married a month later in a simple ceremony. Abigail wore a practical dress she could manage from her wheelchair, and Nathaniel built a ramp so she could wheel herself up to the altar instead of being carried. The church was packed, not with curiosity seekers but with genuine well-wishers. With mothers whose babies Abigail had delivered. With families she'd saved during the epidemic. Victoria Ashford stood as one of the witnesses, holding her son, tears streaming down her face as she watched the woman she'd once scorned be honored and loved. 5 years later, Abigail Fletcher cross-wheeled herself through the streets of Redemption Creek with the confidence of someone who belonged. Her medical practice was thriving, she'd delivered over 100 babies in those 5 years, and her survival rate was the highest in the territory. Doc Pike had officially retired, leaving Abigail as the only medical care for miles. But more than that, the town had changed for her. Nathaniel had started a campaign to make Redemption Creek accessible, building ramps, widening doors, creating spaces where wheelchairs could navigate easily. Other disabled people had started moving to town, hearing that this was a place where they'd be accommodated rather than hidden away. Abigail had trained 2 assistant midwives, both able-bodied women who learned from her that competence had nothing to do with legs. She'd written articles for medical journals about techniques for practicing medicine from a wheelchair, inspiring other disabled healers. And she'd proven, day after day after day, that the measure of a person wasn't what their body could do but what their spirit refused to quit trying. When she wheeled into her house that evening, Nathaniel was there with their adopted daughter, a 7-year-old girl named Rose whom they'd taken in after her parents died in a mining accident. Rose ran to Abigail's chair, climbing into her lap for a hug. "How was your day, Mama?" Rose asked. "I delivered twins," Abigail said, smoothing Rose's hair. "Both healthy. Both perfect. And the mother thanked me for being exactly what she needed." Nathaniel came over and kissed Abigail's forehead. "Because you are exactly what everyone needs. Chair and all." That night, sitting on their porch, which Nathaniel had built with a smooth ramp and wide spaces for her chair, watching Rose play in the yard, Abigail thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a girl who'd lost her legs to a woman who'd found her purpose. From someone the world wanted to hide away to someone who refused to be hidden. She'd spent 16 years proving that disability didn't mean inability. That a wheelchair was just a tool, not a definition. That the strongest thing about her was never going to be her legs, it was her refusal to let anyone tell her what she couldn't do. And in Redemption Creek, Wyoming, she'd found not just a town that needed her, but a town that learned to see capability where they'd expected only limitation. If this story of refusing to be defined by disability, of love that sees the person not the limitation, of proving competence against impossible odds, moved you, please hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to remember that strength comes in many forms, that worth isn't measured by what your body can do, and that the greatest limitations are the ones we impose on ourselves. Subscribe to Western Souls for more tales of courage, capability, and the profound truth that we are so much more than what we appear to be. And tell me in the comments, have you overcome others' low expectations? What happened? Where frontier justice meets the human heart.